Hello, and welcome back to yet another college football video. This will be the last one for about a week, then I'll get back to the NFL team previews, I think. And yeah, man, college football is officially underway. We got the most underrated teams up today. I'll quickly recap what else went on Saturday. I think there were only two other games or three other games. Uh, New Mexico State lost to an FCS team, I think, which that's sad. SMU let me down. SMU was in my top 30, believe it or not, and they went life or death with Nevada. So SMU will be out of my top 30 now for next week. And Hawaii quarterback had four touchdowns against the FCS team, so that's cool, I guess. Anyways, let's take a look at this video here. The most underrated teams in the entire country. Thank you for watching. Starting off here, these were my rankings, of course. Keep in mind, Florida State and SMU will be dropping out of the rankings. Um, what's it called? Georgia Tech will slot in, I think, around 22 or 23, depending on how bad Clemson loses. I think they'll be above Clemson. Um, yeah, man, I gotta find a new team to add at the bottom there. But that's how that were my personal rankings going in to the season, right? That's what this is all based off of. So first up, we have Ole Miss. Now, listen, Ole Miss has consistently in everybody's rankings that I've seen so far has been like top 8, right? But the problem comes in that some people, and I think a lot of people actually have teams like Alabama above Ole Miss, which is complete insanity. And I've even seen some people have Penn State above Ole Miss. There is just absolute. I have Ole Miss above Texas. If you have anybody besides Texas, Oregon, Georgia, and Ohio State, if you have anybody besides those four teams above Ole Miss, you are greatly underrating Ole Miss. You do not understand how good they are. Even without Quinshawn Judkins, they do not need Quinshawn Judkins to be a top 5 team in the country next year. Let's get into it. Here's what they were last year. Of course, we know how good they were offensively. They didn't turn the ball over. They were top 20 in 4 different categories in the SEC, and they didn't even run the ball. Don't get me wrong, they were a good running team, but they didn't run the ball spectacularly. Like they weren't a dominant run team last year, and that's with Quinshawn Judkins. So I think they're going to do a more running back by committee approach next year. Obviously, they're going to have Jackson Dart back there, who's able, dual threat guy, throw and run. I think it's actually going to be a blessing in disguise. I think it's going to make Ole Miss's offense more well-rounded because there were times, a lot of times, where Crenshaw Jenkins was getting force fed. And if you remember early in the season, like the first month of last season, he was playing through an injury. He was not that good. He was getting a lot of touches when he really shouldn't have been. And he was holding their offense back. They only scored 10 points against Alabama. That damn sure would not happen next year. They don't play Alabama next year, but if they did, they'd score a whole lot more than 10 points. Defensively, listen, we know Ole Miss is not a great defensive team, but they're middle of the pack. I feel like you'll take that. If you're Ole Miss right now, you're looking at a top 10 offense and a middle of the pack defense last year, or actually a top 12 offense, middle of the pack defense last year. Next season, I'm looking at a top 10 offense, top 25 defense. And if you think I'm crazy for saying Ole Miss is going to have a top 25 defense, wait till we get to the players that they added. They were already great at getting after the quarterback. They should be one of the best teams in the country next season. 22 points per game allowed in the SEC. That is a great number, a great number for Ole Miss defensively. And they weren't great in terms of pass defense, rush defense, anything in particular. But let's get into the roster now as it stands. Offensively, I dare you to find a flaw in this offense. Now, maybe you say the offensive line has too many transfers. All right, fine. I counter that with one of the best wide receiver cores in the country. Trey Harris, Antoine Wells, Jordan Watkins. All three of those guys have had monster years in the SEC within the last 2 years. All three of those guys are proven SEC slash NFL receivers. The running back room. Ulysses Bentley was there last year, played very well behind Quinshad Judkins. Henry Parrish comes in from Miami. He was obviously very good at Miami. And then you got Rashad Amos comes in from Miami of Ohio. They were the MAC champions, and they basically got it on Rashad Amos's back. So that's an amazing running back room. The quarterback is just, I mean, Jackson Dart is one of the 7 or 8 best quarterbacks in the country. I already made that video. I forgot where he came in specifically, but he was one of the best. A very good tight end in Caden Prescorn. The offense is going to be electric. I think it's a top 7 or 8 offense in the entire country, maybe even top 5. I could absolutely see it being top 5. The only thing that concerns me is the lack of camaraderie and chemistry between the offensive line. If we look at the defense, you bring in Walter Nolan. I think he was the number one player in the entire like 2021 or 2022 class. You bring him in from Texas A&M. You bring in Princely Umamailaline, who I think he had like 7 or 8 sacks as a defensive tackle last year at Florida. He's an absolute monster. You bring in two of those guys to a defensive line who already was great at getting after the quarterback. You bring in Chris Paul Jr. Is he actually Chris Paul's son, by the way? That would be crazy if he is. You bring in Chris Paul Jr., who is a standout linebacker at Arkansas. Trey Amos, I believe he was a corner from Alabama. And you got a couple guys. I think Isaiah Hamilton was a corner at Illinois. The secondary is the only thing that I have a little bit of concern about, but I think they have the talent there to be a good secondary. The front seven, I think, is going to be scary good. I think the front seven is going to be great. I think they're going to have no trouble at all stuffing the run next year. Um, I just think Ole Miss is one of the most improved teams in the country next year. Or sorry, they are one of the most improved teams. And last year they were a top 10 team in the country. If you just compare Ole Miss the trajectory to teams like Alabama, who got so much worse, it's not even quantifiable. I mean, it's not even a question really. I give me Ole Miss over Alabama any day, month, week of the year. Here is what they did last year. Of course, the only two losses came to Alabama and Georgia. They beat Penn State. They beat LSU. They beat A&M. They beat Auburn. Like they beat everybody besides Alabama and Georgia. In both those games, their offense failed them. Defensively, they did good, like well against Alabama, but Georgia, obviously, that was in Georgia. They didn't stand a chance. Nobody stood a chance in Georgia in at that part of the year. But this is their schedule next year. I think I have them going undefeated, actually. Is that accurate? No, I don't think I do. I forgot what I had Ole Miss going. Did I have them losing on the road? I forgot what I had Ole Miss. I think I got them beating Georgia at home, though. I'm almost positive. I have them beating Georgia. No, I don't. I have them losing to Georgia at home. 11-1. Georgia, Missouri undefeated. But I mean that game against Georgia is so impactful. Ole Miss is winning all 11 games besides the Georgia game. I can say that confidently, but I do not know how that Georgia game will play out. But Ole Miss consistently. If you do not have Ole Miss in your top five, you are underrating Ole Miss. Following that, we have Missouri. Missouri straight up is just Missouri is disrespect. I recently saw a poll from someone I respect, Josh Pate, had Missouri at 15. Missouri at 15. That is insanely disrespectful. I think Missouri is a top 6 team in the country. But yeah, I cannot fathom that anybody would have Missouri outside the top 10, but they are consistently outside of the top 10 for teams like Michigan and Penn State, which just baffles my mind to no end. But let's get into it. Missouri last year, if you did not know, was an incredibly well-rounded team. I mean, really no flaws offensively or defensively. They were explosive offensively. They got big stops defensively. They weren't. I mean, if their worst stat in any of this offense defense was tied for 60th. So at their very worst, across the board, they were middle of the pack. That just goes to show that they were a very well-rounded team, very versatile. They ran the ball incredibly well with guys like Cody Schrader, and then they had a very good connection, wide receiver quarterback connection, that is, between Brady Cook and Luther Burden. Both guys returned, by the way. People just seem to forget that. So I think Missouri, similarly to Ole Miss, they finished the season so incredibly strong. They beat a fellow top 10 team in a bowl game, and I'm not going to say they got better in the out because they lost a lot of talent. They lost 2 starting good cornerbacks. They lost their big name star running back. They lost a good edge. They lost a couple really good players, right, to the NFL. With that being said, they made moves in the transfer portal that people overlook. I have not seen anybody talk about Missouri's transfer portal acquisition of Marcus Carroll from Georgia State. I understand it's not the SEC, but Marcus Carroll had like 1,500 yards and 13 touchdowns last year at Georgia State. If you can't, if you're going to sit there and tell me that acquisition just means nothing, okay, fine. What about Nate Noel coming in from App State, who's had like 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns over the last 3 years at App State? They've brought in 2 running backs, so I'm not going to say they're better combined than Cody Schrader, but I do not think their run game is going to take a step backwards. And also, nobody mentions this. They return their top 3 receivers. All their pass game all comes back. No other team, I think, in the SEC can say that. Quarterback, top 3 receivers all return. Only other team that I can think of off the top of my mind is Kansas. That's an incredible amount of retention from Missouri. They're incredibly lucky in that fact. And then you got, I think the tight end is back as well. So it's like Missouri's offense, I think, should be top 15 without a question next year. And then defensively, you bring in guys like Toriano Pride to play cornerback. You obviously had a hole going in there. I don't think it's a top. You already got really good players like Johnny Walker on the defensive line. I don't think it's going to be a top 20, top 25 defense in the country. But look, whatever you want to say, they were top 25 last year. They were without a doubt top 30. I think they could be top 30 again. Top 15 offense, top 30 defense. Incredibly well-rounded team. Plays good situationally. That's a top 10 team in the country without a shadow of a doubt, in my opinion. But people just don't get it. Look at what they did last year, man. They beat Kansas State, ended up being a really good team. Beat Memphis, ended up being a really good team. Beat Kentucky, beat Tennessee, beat Ohio State. Nobody mentions they beat Ohio State, but bowl games don't count, I guess, unless it's the college football playoff. Lost a close game to LSU. That was a very close game, and lost a close. They've played Georgia close back to back years. Like nobody talks about that, man. Missouri has been Georgia's toughest matchup outside of Alabama in the last 2 years. So it is what it is. Looking at their schedule next year, I have them going undefeated. I think Missouri goes 12-0 next year. I think they go to the SEC championship game. I think they beat Alabama on the road. I think they beat Oklahoma at home. I think they beat A&M on the road. Those are their three. Those are their three toughest games. I think they win them all. I think they win them all fairly low difficulty either. So I think Missouri is incredibly underrated. Following that, we have NC State. NC State, I think, is the sleeper team in the ACC. I see hardly anybody. If you just look at the top three teams talked about in the ACC next year, it's probably FSU, Clemson, and Miami. Now, FSU and Clemson get talked about a lot for the negative reasons, but most people still have one of those two teams in the ACC championship game. I have neither of those two teams in the ACC championship game. I have Miami and NC State. I think NC State starts the season off 11-0, and you heard me correctly. I think they beat Tennessee in week 2, and I just think NC State's going to shock the world. If you look at what they were last year, they were bad offensively. This is not really talking about what they were offensively last year, or I mean, NC State as a team last year, they were a really good defense. I'd say they were a top 20 defense in the country. Offensively, they had the wrong quarterback. They brought a quarterback in through the transfer portal. He did not work out whatsoever. It just was not good enough. It was a bad look for NC State last year. With that being said, I'm looking forward here when it comes to NC State. I look at the quarterback that they brought in through the transfer portal, Grayson McCall. He already has like 4 or 5 years of experience at Coastal Carolina, so he stays in state, I believe, unless Coastal is in South Carolina. But he stays in state relatively close. Goes to NC State, an upgrade of talent around him. He was already a proven good quarterback at Coastal Carolina. He goes to an upgrade in talent. Jordan Waters comes in from Duke to play running back. He was very good at Duke last year, probably underutilized, for being honest. I hope he gets a bigger role here at NC State because he could be a star in the ACC. And then you got Kevin Conception, who might have been the best freshman in the country last year. Maybe I shouldn't speak so confidently about that, but I mean, the man had over 100 touches, 1,000 yards, and 10 touchdowns as a true freshman. I mean, the guy's a versatile weapon. Just between those three players, Conception, Grayson McCall, Jordan Waters, I expect this offense to be massively better than they were last. I mean, last year they were middle of the pack at best. I think this could definitely be one of the top 30 or 35 offenses in the country next year. Pair that with a good defense. I mean, you lose your best player in Peyton Wilson, right? He was the star of this defense, but I don't expect them to fall off the cliff. You return 9 starters from last year. Well, 9 of your starters were players last. I don't know how many they lost to the NFL besides Peyton Wilson, but it's a great team, bro. It's a very good team, and they do not. They are miles above Clemson and Florida State, in my opinion. But nobody would say that. I mean, look at what their average ranking was 23. That's just disrespectfully low for NC State, in my opinion. Here's their schedule next year. I think they beat Tennessee in week 2 because it's at home. I think they go on the road and beat Clemson. If you have a problem with that, they did that last year. I think they beat Clemson last year. And then down the stretch, they don't have many tough games. That 3-game stretch at the end, Duke, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, they will lose one of those games. I can guarantee it. I think it's going to be North Carolina on the road. So I think they start the season off 11-0, get into the top 8, 9, 10 in the country, and then lose week 12, but still make the ACC title game. That is my prediction for NC State next year. And if you look at the only teams they lost to, all of those teams were ranked. And at the time, I think they were all ranked in the top 20. Notre Dame, Louisville, Duke, Kansas State. They beat North Carolina. They beat Miami. They beat Clemson. Like, NC State was very underrated last year, and they are being underrated next year, or this year, I should say. Bless me. Following that, we have Kansas. Now, it's just again another team where it's just like, man, how do people not see what I'm seeing? Like when it comes to Kansas, right? They've pretty much proven themselves back to back years, right? I mean, 2022, they started off what 5-0. They started off 5-0, and then their quarterback got hurt, and obviously they weren't the same team, but they showed people how good they can be with Jalen Daniels. Last year, they pretty much didn't have Jalen Daniels at all, and they still won like what 8-9 games with a backup quarterback. You're telling me Kansas can wait 8 or 9 games with a backup at quarterback? No disrespect to Jason Bean, he's going to go ball out in the UFL. I assume I'm a fan. I want to see him ball out in the UFL, but he's no Jalen Daniel. I think everybody understands that. So just by common sense, if you add a star quarterback to a team that won 8 or 9 games and they return most of their players, I mean, how are we not talking about a top 15 team in the country? We absolutely are, in my opinion. But the masses seem to not agree. If you look at Kansas last year, they were one of the best rushing teams in the country. They had a dominant run game. I don't use that word lightly. They had a dominant run game, and explosive with a backup quarterback. They were top 21 in yards, eighth in rushing yards, and 17th in points per game with a backup quarterback. And their offensive line played incredibly well. They did not give up hardly any pressure. And then defensively, look, it's Kansas, right? But I would say this is impressive for Kansas. I would say being middle of the pack defensively is impressive for Kansas. They were the 60th best defense in the country last year. You take that. You take that all day if you're Kansas. And honestly, I'll take that next year. If you just told me that these stats will be exactly the same for Kansas next year, okay, I'll take that because I know the offense is going to take a big jump. I know they are. They're going to average at least 37, 38 points per game next year, in my opinion. So if we just take a look here at the roster, remember what I said earlier about Missouri returns their top 3 receivers? Well, so does Kansas. Kansas returns Lawrence Arnold, Quentin Skinner, Luke Grimm. But you know what they also return? You know why I am so high on Kansas? They also return both of their top running backs. By the way, Devin Neal had like 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns or whatever. Devin Neal's a star. They return him. Daniel Highshaw is one of the best backups in the country. So they return both their running backs. They return their head coach. They return their quarterback. This offense should be unstoppable. It should be unstoppable in the Big 12. And then defensively, you return your best defensive player. Kobe Bryant, the cornerback, he was the best player on this defense. He comes back. So it's like, I mean, man, give me the 60th best defense next year for Kansas, and this is a 10-win team all day, all night. All day, all night. This is a 10-win team, and they should make the Big 12 championship game. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough at the top. You got Utah, you got Kansas State, you got Oklahoma State, Arizona, but Kansas should be right in the mix. And honestly, I pick Kansas. I think the Big 12 championship game is going to be Kansas and probably Oklahoma State. Between them, Arizona, Oklahoma State, those are my 3 picks. I think Kansas State and Utah are being overrated. That's why they were in my overrated video list. But yeah, man, I think Kansas is just being incredibly slept on. And if you look at the schedule, I mean, they beat Oklahoma last year. They beat UCF. They beat Iowa State. Those are some pretty good Big 12 teams. And I mean, they should start the season off 7-0. Easily should be a 7-0 start for Kansas. The only game that should be slightly difficult is West Virginia on the road. But man, it should be a 7-0 start for Kansas. They should be in the top 12, top 10 nationally. But they do have to play Kansas State and Colorado. It's an easy it's such a light schedule. Like this is the thing. Kansas does not play a single one of my personal top 25 teams. I don't think I can say that about anybody else in the country. They play Colorado and Kansas State, who are in my top 30. But bro, Kansas' schedule was complete light work, and they should run for 250 on Colorado. That should be a given. And they're just better than Kansas State across the board. So, man, Kansas could go undefeated. Nobody's talking about it. It's such an easy schedule. They have what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have like 6 games where they should be 10-point favorites. So, yeah, man, Kansas, stop sleeping on Kansas because it's going to come back to bite a lot of people. Following that, we have Miami. Miami's a team where it's just like I just keep getting higher and higher on them as the offseason continues. Now it's just a season, but it's like over time I've just been getting more and more confident in Miami. And I actually think at this point, I think they're going to go 13-0 and win the ACC and make the playoff as a top 2 or 3 team in the country. I just believe that about Miami now. I'm so high on them. They had such an amazing offseason. Like they upgraded so much. It's not even funny. So I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm all in. I'm all in on Miami. Um, but people are just listen. Whatever your preconceived notions are about Miami and about Mario Cristobal, ignore all that. If you just look at this roster, there is no denying this is a top 10 team in the country. There is no denying they're better than Alabama across the board. Like, it's not even close, bro. It's not even close. This is what they were last year. And this is the thing. They were a bad team. Let's get that out of the way. They were a bad team last year, right? They were top 25 in three categories defensively. Their lines of scrimmage on both sides were good last year. They already have that foundation. Okay. Now you're adding in the extra shit. They had a quarterback who turned it over way too much, right? You get rid of that. You get rid of that. You upgrade massively at running back. You upgrade the receiver core. You upgrade the front seven defensively, right? This is not a bad foundation. They were terrible situationally at Miami last year. That's all they got to fix. The talent is now there for a championship type run. They just have to fix the situational mistakes, the turnovers by the quarterback, which will not happen next year under Cam Ward. Massive upgrade at quarterback. Just take a look at the roster, right? Cam Ward, top 10 quarterback in the country. Damian Martinez, top 10 running back in the country. I'd say this is the top 5 or 6 receiving core in the country. Jacoby George, Samuel Brown, both studs. Xavier Restrepo, 1,000 yards last year already. I mean, Mark Fletcher as a backup running back is great. We already mentioned how good the offensive line was last year. Defensively, I mean, Tyler Barron from Tennessee. I mean, the front seven, Ruben Bain had a monster year last year. Francisco Mayagua, whatever his name is. It's a great defense, bro. Michelle Powell comes in from Washington. I mean, we could be really looking at a team that's like a top 5 offense, top 15 defense, man. I see the potential there. I really do. I really do see the potential there for Miami. I think Miami is going to just come out the gates firing and really just dominate next year. Honestly, I really think they're just going to like. I don't think it's going to be very difficult for them. I mean, I think they're going to beat Florida week 1 and not look back. Their schedule does not get tough to the second half, so they're going to start off 6-0 fairly easily. And when they play Louisville at Louisville, Louisville might even have their best player. Colin Lacey might be out that game. So I mean, I think they will win that game. Florida State at home, we now see how terrible Florida State is. That's an easy win. I mean, their last 3 games are fairly easy. At Georgia Tech, we all know what happened there last year. That could be a struggle. But even last year, they beat Clemson. They beat Clemson and A&M last year. They had multiple ranked wins last year while they were bad. So, and look how many games they scored 30 plus last year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Like they like, yeah, bro. I think Miami has everything they need to be one of the best teams in the country next year. Following that, we have Arizona. I mentioned it earlier with Kansas. I really do think Arizona is going to be one of the teams in the Big 12 that like is heavy contending for winning the entire Big 12. And I'll be honest, this pretty much just comes down to because they lost their head coach. They lost their head coach. I should mention that. This pretty much just comes down to how much I love the connection between Noah Fafita and Teratoa McMillan. That like if you just replace one of those guys with an average player, I probably don't have them in my top 20. With that being said, having both of those guys playing together, I think is going to make Arizona next to unstoppable next year. Especially in the Big 12. You just look at the stats, right? They were a great offense. Keep in mind, their quarterback didn't even play like at all in the first half of the season, damn near. Like he came in midway through, and they were still a top 10 pass game in the country. They still were a top 20 offense in terms of total yards and scoring. They struggle to run the ball, but we'll get into why I think that'll be very different next year. Defensively, they were top 30 in 3 categories. They got after the quarterback. They stuffed the run, and they only gave up 21 points per game in the Pac-12. That is incredibly impressive in the Pac-12. So, like, people may think Arizona's like just an air raid offense, doesn't play any defense or whatever. That's not true. That is not the case last year. I don't think it'll be the case next year in the Big 12 either. If we take a look at the roster, obviously Noah Fafita at quarterback, one of the better in the country. Let's talk about 2 running backs they bring in. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Quaylee Conley both come in from G5 teams. I think New Mexico State and San Jose State. Both these guys were dogs last year. Both these guys had well over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, like well over 1,000. I think Conley had like 1,500. I think Merritt had like 13 or 1400. Both these guys were dogs at the G5 level, and they both now come to play at Arizona. I love that combo. I absolutely love that combo. Um, the receiver core outside McMillan is unproven, but I have my hopes high for guys like Romello Murphy and Montana. These names are kind of crazy. I have high hopes for the guys not named Territorial McMillan. So yeah, I think the offense is pretty much a given. Like I think everybody expects this to be a top 15 offense in the country, but defensively, man, they came in, they reworked the front seven. They reworked the front seven. They already had guys like Justin Flo. I mean, the secondary, maybe you could make the argument that it needs some work. I can understand that. I can understand. I'm not saying it's going to be a top 10, top 15, top 20 defense in the country, but I don't think it's going to be the reason Arizona is losing big games. I don't think they are going to lose many games. If we take a look at their schedule here, it gets tough back to back. Back to back, you have Kansas State, Utah. After that, it's pretty much smooth sailing. You got Colorado at home, you got UCF on the road. Those aren't easy, but I mean, as long as you win one of Utah or Kansas State on the road, both those games are on the road. Both those games are tough games, right? As long as you win one of those games on the road, it's a guaranteed 10-win season for Arizona. I wholeheartedly believe it's a guaranteed 10 wins as long as you beat Kansas State or Utah. So, and if you beat both, if they beat both, we're talking about undefeated here. And look at what Arizona did, by the way. So they lost to Mississippi State week 2. Washington, they lost. I think USC was the first game that Fafita played, and he played incredibly well. And then after that, they ran off 7 in a row. And by the way, can we take a look, by the way, at how many teams they played that were ranked at some point? Oklahoma ranked, Utah ranked, Colorado ranked early, UCLA ranked, Oregon State ranked, Washington State ranked early, USC ranked, Washington ranked. I mean, bro, they played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of their last 9 games were against teams who were ranked at some point, and they went 7-2. So, yeah, bro, I think Arizona's in for a monster season next year, and they're gonna shock a lot of people because they're being slept on so heavily. After that, we have Washington. Washington, it's the case with Washington is this: people really just do not think that Washington will be able to bounce back after losing so much talent, and I understand that argument. I could understand having Washington at 20 or 25 or 28, right? But to have Washington just not even close, really, not even close to being a ranked team. And we saw how highly they favored Florida State, who had a worse season than Washington last year and lost just as much talent, by the way. Florida State lost just as much talent as Washington, but they were ranked in the top 10, and Washington was outside the top 25. Now, we saw that Florida State was not that good. I already knew that, but now the whole world sees that Florida State is not as good as they were ranked to start with. Okay, fine. Why does Washington not get the same benefit of the doubt? Why do they not get the same benefit of the doubt as TCU, for example, who lost a fuck ton of talent? Washington's just they've been completely overlooked for no reason, in my opinion. Like I said, I'm not saying they're a top 20 team. Nobody should have Washington in their top 20. But I think Washington is going to absolutely shock people with how good they are next year. Let's take a look at I mean, do we even need to bring this up? We kind of all know what Washington was last year. I mean, it is what it is. That we all know the stars they had on both sides of the ball, whatever, that made them so good last year. It's a completely different team. So I don't even think we need to really break this down right here. If we look at the roster, we have multiple receivers, Denzel Boston, Giles Jackson, who already have experience in the system and this offense. Now you can make the argument it's going to be a new offense. Okay, fine. Jeremiah Hunter played at Cal last year, I believe. He already was like a 800, 900, 700. I think he already was close to a 1,000-yard guy. He was already close to a 1,000-yard guy at Cal. Do I have to bring up the quarterback play at Cal? He is a proven commodity at receiver. He should be their number 1 receiver. He has great size, by the way. I love, and I emphasis on love, the running back duo of Jonah Coleman and Cam Davis. Cam Davis did not play at all last year. That's why Washington's run game struggled so much. He was a stud in 2022, did not play in 2023 due to an injury. He is coming back now. And they also bring in Jonah Coleman, who played at Arizona and was a stud there. So they have multiple running backs who I love and trust and I think are going to be good next year. So we have a number 1 receiver. We have multiple running backs. We have depth at receiver that, has experience at Washington already. And we have a transfer quarterback who, listen to me now, just in terms of resume, what they've done in their college career, has the best resume in the entire Big Ten, Will Rogers, besides Dylan Gabriel, probably. besides Dylan Gabriel, the best resume in the entire Big Ten at quarterback. How will he look in a new system with new talent? I have no idea. He was back and forth, hot and cold at Mississippi.
Actually gave up on him last year at Mississippi State. I am changing my tune because he has a new set of scenery around him. I don't think he's going to be a star. I don't think he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country, but he is not some bum that they found off the street. And I think he is one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten. So I think the offense should be good. I think the offense should be explosive. The defense is where I definitely have a lot of concerns. I'm not even going to try and pretend that I think it's going to be some top. I don't think they're going to be a top 30, 40, 50 defense in the country. I think if you're a Washington fan, you're hoping for a middle of the pack defense that does not give up 200 rushing yards a game, right? Because last year they gave up, what did they give up? They gave up 148. That's not bad. That's not bad. If you give up 160, 165, 170 rushing yards a game next year in the Big Ten, you'll probably take that if you're Washington, to be honest. They're not a great defense. They lost their best players, but I think they're going to be good offensively, really good even. And if you look at their schedule here, where are the killers early on? The first 4 games are layups. The 5th game is going to be the first real test in the Big Ten. I think they win. I think Washington starts off 5-0 and gets into everybody's top 15, top 16. The Michigan game is the loss. The Michigan game, you're going to lose that game, I think. Even though you're at home, Michigan's not that good. I think you lose that game. Iowa on the road is going to be tough, but I think you beat Iowa. I think you lose to Penn State and Oregon. So I think Washington goes 9-3. But this is the thing, bro. People think they're going to win 5 games. People really think Washington's going to be like a 5-7 team next year. I don't get that. I do not see that vision whatsoever. I think they're going to be 9-3. I think they may get the 10-win season with the bowl game, which would be crazy to think about. It would be absolutely crazy to think about Washington potentially winning 10 games next year after all the talent they lost. But I think it's realistic. You lose to the best 3 teams you play, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, and you take care of business against everybody else. USC, UCLA layups. Iowa is your toughest game outside the top 3. I don't think that's a tough opponent. So I think Washington's going to do much better than people think they are. And next up, you got Memphis. Here's the thing about Memphis. Memphis, in my opinion, should be right up there as the number 1 team when people talk about their best group of 5 team for the college football playoff. I have not seen a single person put Memphis in their hypothetical college football playoff, even though, in my opinion, they are the best G5 team in the country. The only other team that's close is Liberty, but I think Liberty's a safer pick for the college football playoff because they have an easier schedule. So I think it's more likely that Liberty goes undefeated 13-0 than Memphis because Memphis plays tougher opponents. But I have not seen anybody mention Memphis in their college football playoff thing, even though they are the best G5. I see so many Boise States, a good amount of Liberties, which is smart, but no Memphis, which is crazy to me. I think Memphis is an amazing offense. Let's get to the roster here. Seth Hennigan is a top 10 quarterback in the country. He could potentially lead the country in passing yards next year. That's not an exaggeration at all. He could absolutely throw for close to 5,000 yards next year. I love the duo at wide receiver between Rock Taylor and Demir Blankenship. Both of those guys had basically 1,000 yards last year. They both return. You bring in Mario Anderson Jr. from South Carolina now. Memphis lost their star running back last year, Blake Watson. He was a stud last year at Memphis. You lose him to the NFL, and you bring in Mario Anderson. He was a beast at not a beast. He was very good at South Carolina behind a terrible offensive line. I now believe at Memphis he will produce even better than he did previously. Defensively, you bring in 7 transfers, which might not be a good sign, but I mean, it is what it is. Memphis, they were not a great defense last year. I think they should be better than they were next year. But offensively, I know at least that Memphis is going to be a dominant offense next year in the AAC. Here are the stats, what they were last year. Listen, they were top 15 in 3 categories. They scored nearly 40 points a game. They threw the ball on any and everybody. And then look, they were bad defensively. I can't argue that point. But offensively, man, this absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, should be a top 10 offense in the country next year. But nobody's giving them any credit, and it's pissing me off. It really is. Here's the schedule next year. Find me the law. Honestly, I think they beat Florida State. We all just saw what Florida State is. I already had them beating before the game. I had them beating Florida State before the Georgia Tech game. After the Georgia Tech game, I am confident that they're going to beat Florida State. And after that, bro, it's Tulane on the road. It's Tulane on the road. They lost to Tulane last year. That's going to be a tough game. But bro, they played Missouri close. They didn't have a bad loss last year. They played Missouri close. They beat Boise State. They beat Iowa State. They played SMU incredibly close. They were good last year. They won 10 games, and they're going to win at least 10 games next year. So Missouri or Memphis is my if they go 11-1, 12-1, I should say, they're my pick for the G5 championship team that gets into the college football playoff. But if they win two or more, or they lose, I should say, if they lose two or more, then I don't think they're going to make the playoff. But that's going to be it for this video, man. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.